VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker. We are 3 weeks away from the NFL draft, 22 days to be exact. And right before we press record on this episode, a blast from the past from these Vikings. Stefon Diggs was traded to the Texans. Incidentally, we have Ryan Roberts here from RiseNDraft, a first-timer on Vikes Now. I don't think he's necessarily a Vikings fan or anything close to it, but he knows the draft, so we got him on in the month of April. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, guys. I'm doing well. Thank you guys for having me today. It's very appreciated.
Oh, absolutely. We hope you come back as often as you'd like. So what I want to start with is this dig stuff, because if we got it right, scanning the internet before hopping on this show, Stefon Diggs is going to the Houston Texans, who don't need wide receiver weapons, so they will get more affluent. It leaves the Bills barren at wide receiver, and it cost a 2025 second rounder, we think, and that was the Vikings pick that the Texans just got with a trade. So react to that live with us, please.
Oh man, there's so much to talk about with that one, isn't there? I mean, first and foremost, I mean the big thing that people were I remember during the season, everyone was just kind of falling in love with Stefon Diggs, just speaking, high praises for Josh Allen each and every week, right? About how he's his quarterback and how he's in love and how he couldn't see himself anywhere else. And then obviously the end of the season into the offseason, we've just been talking about, like what the long-term future is. But I didn't think that anything was overly imminent as far as like something this quickly that was going to happen. And I mean, for both sides, I mean, Houston, young quarterback with CJ Stroud, obviously getting him even more weapons, I think is a great proposition for the health of their franchise moving forward. But then on the Bills side of things, I mean, we've been pretty much penciling in a wide receiver at pick number 28, and that's a foregone conclusion, sure. I guess, at this point. Like, there's no other way that you can really go now that you don't have Stefon Diggs. So I'm curious to see if it changes their philosophy as far as, like, are you going to be aggressive trading up? Because, I mean, you're probably going to get a good situational secondary option at 28, right? Like you're probably going to get a guy that can stretch the defense a little bit, maybe a la an AD Mitchell type, but are you going to be super aggressive and going up and trying to get one of the top 3 receivers in this class, right? Are you going to go and be super aggressive and try to make sure that you get a Rome Odunze or get a Brian Thomas Jr., get someone that might be out of your range? I think that it's going to be very interesting to see how just that impacts the draft for Buffalo, because obviously they have a big need at wide receiver, even bigger than we once thought.
Yeah, and they're kind of done what people have said about the Vikings. They've forced themselves into a corner now where it's no mystery. It wasn't a mystery last week, and it sure as hell not a mystery now. And it's not just, if you care about the Bills, it's not just examining whether or not they use a first. It's whether or not they have a bonanza of drafting wide receivers, because it's naked on that depth chart, at least for dudes that can make an impact, like Shakir. Josh, you said that right before we started the show. Is that about it, Josh? Is Shakir and then Nubbins?
I think so. I'd have to pull up the Buffalo Bills depth chart.
I'm going to do that
to be sure. But yeah, I mean, it feels really barren there at that spot right now in Buffalo. And Josh Allen, it just doesn't feel like they've really got enough weapons for him. And they already were struggling a bit last year, even with Diggs on that roster. Obviously, they caught fire a bit down the stretch to make the playoffs, but without that surefire wide receiver 1 anymore, it kind of feels like that AFC East is kind of wide open now.
Yeah, it's going to be super interesting because, I mean, again, you were trying to find a niche at 28 more than anything, right? Because you had Stefon Diggs, who's your number 1 receiver, right? Like he can do a lot of things, obviously, for an offense. You were trying to find, though, a guy that was what Gabe Davis was supposed to be for their offense, a guy that can really push it vertically and create some big plays. And he obviously did not fulfill that the last 2 years for Buffalo to what they would want to. So, but you were trying to find a guy at 28 that could have that niche in an offense. But now you're left trying to find not only a number 1 receiver, but still find that niche. You know what I mean? So you're going to have to double dip or make something happen with magic the next couple months before the season, or else you're going to be asking Josh Allen to make a lot of magic after some minimal talent, to say the least, at wide receiver right now.
If they did nothing, which we know won't happen, I just pulled it up. It would be Shakir. It would be Curtis Samuel, who we forgot about, who's a decent WR3 type, and then Mac Hollins, who we kind of know from the Raiders days. So, yeah, I think they're just emulating the Chiefs model, although Diggs isn't as productive as Tyreek Hill, where they need a little salary cap relief. I think we know that. And then Diggs, for almost 4 years to the day, is on the move once again. arguably didn't work out in Buffalo. I guess it kind of did because they were always there in the mix, but never got quite to the Super Bowl, thanks to those very Chiefs. All right, so those are our Diggs takes. We might circle back to them depending on what Ryan's answer is to the next one. Josh, you got a draft question for Ryan, his forte. Let's hear it.
Yeah, so obviously draft season's right around. The draft season is here. Draft is right around the corner. But I'm wondering, over every single draft process, there's some sort of prospect who either rises or falls in terms of their draft stock before the actual event. Who do you see in terms of a prospect who is the biggest wild card in this draft? So just somebody who could either go top 10 or just fall out of the first round entirely, or somebody who's viewed as a second rounder, third rounder, who you could feasibly see going in the first round.
I have two names for you, one on each side of the coin. Okay. So for a guy that has been pretty much penciled in as a top 20 selection for the most part in every mock draft that you'll find is Latu, who is the pass rusher out of UCLA. Now, I could see a world where Latu is the first edge off the board. I think that is on the table. Obviously he's fighting with Jared Verse out of Florida State, with Dallas Turner out of Alabama, who are all much different pass rushers, to say the least. Latu is much more not as explosive, obviously, as a Dallas Turner, not as powerful as Jared Verse, but the most nuanced of the three. Like, he plays with incredible pass rush plan, some great hands at the point of attack. Like, he is just kind of that guy that is ready-made to be an NFL pass rusher. But the big thing about him is we all know that when he was at Washington originally, he had to medically retire due to a neck injury, right? And anytime that situation happens, there is going to be a deep medical check that you're going to have to get clearance on, right? Like, a guy is not going to just invest in a player that they can't tangibly say is going to be healthy enough during the duration of a rookie contract, or maybe hopefully into the second level of a contract, right? So I'm looking at Latu, and although I think that it's possible he's drafted that high, I've heard some mixed reviews after the combine, which obviously is the big medical check period of things. So I think that there's going to be a little bit of a back and forth where, do the medicals check out? Do they not check out? So he could be a player that is forced into day two and is more of a gamble than what he was once projected as. So although I do think that he could be drafted that high, I'm just curious to see if there is a slide that happens, because those medical checks are obviously very important to the evaluation process. He checks all the boxes as far as his film was very good the last 2 years at UCLA. He checked the boxes athletically, but do the medicals check out that makes a team want to invest that highly in Latu? So that would be one player. The other guy on the other side is, there is a very heavy debate right now on who is safety one in the 2024 NFL draft. Some people, like Cameron Kitchens out of Miami, even though he tested historically poorly at the combine, but his play was pretty dang good for Miami over the last 2 years. I mean, he's probably the best true center fielder in the class. Some people there's a hive of just about every safety at the top of the class. Tyler Newman is another one from Minnesota. One guy, though, that I think hasn't been talked about enough, that I think Dane Brugler had just put out, that his safety one and his safety one for several teams across the NFL, is Jaden Hicks out of Washington State, who just tested really well at their pro day. Ran 4.47. Explosive numbers were good. He was impactful for Washington State over the last 2 years. Only a redshirt sophomore coming out this past year. He's more in the strong safety mold than a true center fielder type, right? So he's not that true free safety type on the next level. But that kid just has something to him as far as just kind of the proactive nature of playing the position. He just seems to always be around the football. He's explosive in short areas, very productive. If there is a safety that gets drafted in the first round, which I'm not sold on yet, but if there is, I actually think it might be Jaden Hicks out of Washington State, and a little bit of surprise because I haven't heard his name in a first round conversation, but I just wouldn't be overly shocked if a safety needy team during the second half of the first round decides to opt for a player like Jaden Hicks out of Washington State.
Speaking of the first round, Ryan, this might be one of the main reasons Vikings fans tuned into the YouTube show today. First, I'll ask you the second part of this question in about 5 minutes. I want to know your Vikings round one prediction, whether that's a trade, whether that's sticking and picking. When the dust settles at like 10 p.m. on April 25th, what have they got out of round one as a prediction?
Well, I mean, I would be shocked if they stuck at 11 and 23. Like, I mean, obviously, anytime you get that extra first round pick, especially in the 20s, there's a reason that you're doing that, right? You're trying to leverage yourself to be able to move up and to take your guy. And obviously, a team that just lost Kirk Cousins this offseason and has obviously a hole at quarterback, they're going to be aggressive, I think. I mean, I would just be overly shocked if Minnesota didn't try to make something happen. And I think that they will make something happen. I think the biggest two questions that you have are, one, who's the trade partner? I think Cole's obviously start at number 3 to New England, because I think they're a team that, and I've been told that they're a team that isn't necessarily going to force a quarterback at 3 if there's not a guy they love. And I think that New England has kind of a understanding that they might be in a little bit of a 3-year rebuild period. So I don't think they're just going to force a quarterback to force a quarterback. But then number 4, obviously, with the Arizona Cardinals could be a spot, the Los Angeles Chargers at 5. Like, those 3 spots are kind of the easiest, like, team to team conversations that we can start with as far as making calls. And I think that Minnesota will get it done ultimately, and they'll get up to take their quarterback. Who do I think it's going to be?
Yeah.
I think it's going to be JJ McCarthy. I really do. I mean, I know Vegas obviously is heavy favorites of McCarthy right now too, but there's just something about it that makes a whole lot of sense, right? And not the sense is in, and we'll talk about it later, that I wouldn't necessarily, he would be my guy if I'm trading up for a quarterback, but I just, for whatever reason, he just feels like a Kevin O'Connell guy, you know, and I really can't even 100% put my finger on it. There's just something sometimes where you just look at a marriage and you're just like, yep, that's a Kevin O'Connell guy. I don't know if it's just kind of the, you know, he's kind of a smooth operator out of structure. He can move the pocket a little bit. I mean, I think of him, you know, with the system, obviously with his, you know, his experience with Sean McVay, you know, being able to move the pocket a little bit off of play action and hitting some shallow and deep crossers. Like, there's just something about JJ that screams Kevin O'Connell to me, right? So my prediction today is they're aggressive and trade up and they take the quarterback out of Michigan. It just feels like it to me right now.
I've said it on this show and probably talked Josh's ear off about it. They're both like eternal optimists too, both guys. For God's sake, McCarthy had like a smiley face on his shirt at the pro day, and Kevin O'Connell is like the ultimate like rah culture guy. And so on top of the attributes that you mentioned with the Sean McVay connection, how an offense is run, I think when people just kind of naturally gravitate towards people that are like themselves, I think you're onto something there where it's like Kevin and JJ are like doing the Spider-Man meme in terms of a personality.
Yeah, and JJ, I will say this also about JJ is I was in Indianapolis for the combine this year, and I've been able to go now a few times, and he is he's very authentic feeling as far as how he presents himself, but he's also like, he has an attractive personality, right? Like, he has a little bit of that energy to him. You could tell that he's a guy that if you sit down with him and you talk ball and just kind of diagram some stuff and just really kind of get into the nitty and gritty of stuff, he does have a really magnetic personality. So I'm not overly shocked that the NFL likes JJ McCarthy. We can have the conversation of like, do I think it's warranted on the field compared to where some of the other guys are, which is a very fair conversation. But I think him as a younger quarterback who did a lot of good things, obviously the last 2 years at Michigan, that has that personality to him, that has developmental potential, it's not overly shocking that some teams are valuing JJ the way they are.
Agreed. Go ahead, Josh. What do you got for Ryan Roberts, RiseNDraft?
Yeah, it's funny we started this conversation talking about wide receivers because I do think that wide receiver is kind of a sneaky need for the Vikings in this draft. Just because no more KJ Osborne, you got to kind of fill that WR3 spot behind Addison and Justin Jefferson. So obviously the Vikings don't have a day 2 pick right now, but looking into day 3, who do you kind of see in that wide receiver group as a sleeper who you think could be a contributor? Maybe not immediately, but in the next year or two.
Well, there's 2 guys that I really like as kind of my day 3 sleepers at wide receiver. One is Jalen McMillan, who is not a new name to most people out of Washington, because he was actually going into the year. It was Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan. It wasn't Jalen Polk that a lot of people were talking about as far as being the true prospects at Washington. But he's kind of gotten overshadowed a little bit, obviously, with playing with Rome, and now Rome potentially being a top 10 pick in the 2024 class. And then Jalen Polk is a guy that a lot of people are considering like a top 50-ish type of player at this point in the draft, potentially. But I really think Jalen McMillan's got a lot of traits that I love, man. He actually tested a little bit better than I thought he was going to be. I thought he was going to be more in like the 4.52 type of range as far as 40-yard dash times, but he ran in the high 4.4s. And I just think that there's a there's a smoothness to how he plays. He reminds me a whole lot of Tyler Boyd, a guy that is going to probably make a living inside a lot, but I think that he has enough length and enough just understanding of how to attack leverage that he could play outside as well as more of a Z type receiver on the next level as well, trying to get him off the line of scrimmage a little bit. So he is kind of a movement based wide receiver, short motions, motioning across, let him evaluate space, let him be a really good route runner, and let him be a little bit of an underrated separator with his athleticism. I think he brings a good level of overall athleticism to the table. So Jalen McMillan slept on a little bit in Washington this year. And then the other guy is Jamari Thrash, who I just have a little bit of a draft crush on him, to be honest. So he was Louisville this past year. Before that, he was at Georgia State. And I remember seeing him at Georgia State for the first time. I'm like, that kid is just, he's a different type of athlete than Georgia State ever has. I mean, like, he really is. And then he goes to Louisville and he doesn't look out of place in the ACC. I mean, he is there and he is Louisville's number one receiver. He's got kind of that similar feel to a Jalen McMillan in the sense of he's incredibly smooth, one of the better route runners in the class, but very underrated explosiveness. I mean, he can stack a little bit and work vertically to a good degree, but he is just that true isolated route runner. 101, he is going to get open. He's going to create instant and easy separation. I really like Jamari Thrash. I think that he is a player out of Louisville that is going to surprise a lot of folks because I think that he is one of the best route runners and one of the easiest transitions to the next level because that does translate the ability to separate.
I'm absolutely stoked that you brought him up because I talked Dustin's ear off about him a couple weeks ago. And to be honest, he reminds me a ton of Jordan Addison, just as a player, just with that route runner and just that sneaky explosiveness that he has to get downfield. So yeah, I love that fit. I love it.
Well, yeah. I think that's the coolest thing about Thrash is I actually kind of like that Addison comparison. I might steal that, to be honest with you, Josh. Okay. I might steal that comp because it's really interesting because I think that some people underrated Jordan Addison's vertical speed coming out of USC because he was such a good route runner, right? Like sometimes we just think of like, oh, that guy's a pristine route runner. That must mean that he's overcompensating in other areas, right? Like that's kind of where our mind goes a little bit, but then he runs and you're like, oh, the guy's, fast. I mean, like you see him in Minnesota this year where he's creating separation down the field a good bit as a rookie. So I think Thrash brings a lot of that same attributes as far as he's going to kind of lull you to sleep as a route runner. But then if you're not on your P's and Q's, like he's going to be able to get on your toes and then work vertically a good bit. So I really like that. I'm going to steal that comp. I just want to get
awesome.
I want you to understand that. Yeah.
Go for it.
Speaking of the Spider-Man meme, you guys just did that with Thrash. So so now if he gets drafted by the Vikings, I'm going to be ultra excited. All right. The final thing we got for you, Ryan, as promised, we had the prediction from you a little bit ago, McCarthy to the Vikings, probably at 4 or 5. I want to know if you were Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, you were in charge of the Vikings. How would you script this draft? Which quarterback? I think you get one of those for the Vikings. What would you do if you were in charge?
Yeah, I mean, going with the same thought process, I would be aggressive, because I look at Minnesota and there is a lot of things to like with that roster, right? I mean, you guys already mentioned the 2 wide receivers that they have at the top. I mean, it is a very easy spot for a quarterback to come in and I think contribute early. And honestly, with the JJ McCarthy conversation from a couple minutes ago, it would be the ideal situation for JJ to go to a place like Minnesota because not only are you working with 2 great wide receivers, I think working with Kevin O'Connell would be most beneficial for him to be able to hit his upside sooner rather than later, as a little bit more of a developmental guy. For me, like if I am jumping up for a quarterback, though, that's name is not Caleb Williams, because Caleb Williams is going to be the first overall selection in Chicago, and they're not going to move off of that, right? I think that you're hoping that Washington drafts Jaden Daniels at number 2. And that means that you have the option between Drake May and JJ McCarthy. And if it was me, I would go up for Drake May personally. They're about the same age. They're the same year coming out. They're both third-year players. I think that Drake May, for me, though, is a little bit disrespected in this class, and not to a crazy degree, because I do think that there was a little bit of mix in his 2023 film. Like, I don't think it was perfect. I think he made a few more boneheaded decisions than what he had made the year prior. Like, I wasn't expecting his production to be the same after Phil Longo left and after, Joshua Downs left. Like, I wasn't expecting that to be the same, but I was expecting the finer points of playing quarterback to take a step forward. And I don't really think they did. I think he was kind of the same as he was in 2022, just kind of with a little bit less supports around him. But regardless, you can't teach 6'4 plus. You can't teach the frame he has. You can't teach the arm strength. And he's a good athlete as well. I mean, we're talking about JJ McCarthy, his ability to move the pocket. Drake May has those things as well, So I look at Drake and I say, he is the most likely, out of my opinion, to be a superstar out of the quarterbacks in this class. I like Jaden Daniels for what he is, but he's a little bit of an older prospect, a little bit of a slender frame that might, it might be tough for him to handle some of the physical toll of playing the quarterback position on the NFL level. I look Drake May and I say, working with Kevin O'Connell, if you're able to develop him properly, he could be a superstar. I think he has that type of upside coming out of North Carolina.
This is a Drake May show, so that
Love
opinion is popularly received. All right, sir, where can we find you on the internet? I know RiseNDraft. Tell us where.
Yeah. On Twitter, you can find me at RiseNDraft, like Shake and Bake, RiseNDraft. We have the First Team NFL Draft and College Football podcast on the Believe Podcast Network. If you want to check out that work, I have some scouting reports over at Steelers Depot this year for some reason. I have on College Sports Wire. I have some NFL draft work over there as well. So as long as you search RiseNDraft on Twitter, it's pretty easy to find. Just follow along with the content that I'm posting.
Outstanding. All right, sir. I'm going to hit your line probably right after the draft in May or so. And then perhaps if you enjoyed yourself, we can chat about the Vikings outcome there. Anything else for the group, Ryan?
Man, we're a few weeks away, and I know that it's super busy, obviously, for everyone's time, but I appreciate you guys for having me on for the first time, and I definitely look forward to coming back again. There's no doubt.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. All right,
Awesome.
sir. We'll talk to you in about 1 month then, all right?
Sounds like a plan.
All right, take it easy. Later.